Some moments in history are just so wild, so incredible, they feel more like myth than actual fact. Today, we're going to dive into three of those moments. The absolutely epic last stands of warriors who stared down impossible odds and chose to meet their end with a kind of courage that's almost hard to believe. So, what is it that makes a final moment legendary? Is it just pure defiance? Is it the sacrifice, or is it something else entirely? That's the question we're going to try and unpack as we look at three people who carved their names into history in their last, breathtaking moments. First up, we're journeying to 12th century Japan to meet a warrior monk whose loyalty was so powerful, his enemies literally found him dead on his feet, still guarding his master. Then, we're going to hit the high seas with an undefeated Korean admiral. This guy, after being fatally wounded, actually concealed his own death to trick everyone, his allies and his enemies, into winning one final impossible victory. And for our last story, we'll leap forward to the battlefields of World War II. It's about a field medic, a dentist of all things, who was sworn to save lives but was forced to wage a one-man war to protect his wounded comrades. All right, let's kick things off in 12th century Japan with the towering warrior monk Saito Musashibo Benkei. Now, I know when you hear monk, you're probably not picturing this guy. Benkei wasn't exactly seeking quiet enlightenment. His path was, well, a whole lot bloodier. See, he was on a personal quest, a mission, to fight and defeat 1,000 arrogant samurai, and as trophies, he would take their swords. By the time our story really gets going, he'd already collected 999 of them. He just needed one more. But his 1,000th opponent, well, this one was different. He was a much smaller, almost unassuming samurai named Yoshitsune, who, against all odds, swiftly defeated the giant Benkei. Now, Benkei was humiliated for sure, but he was also deeply impressed. So he completely abandoned his violent quest and instead swore a lifelong oath of absolute loyalty to Yoshitsune. From that day on, they were inseparable. So years go by, years of war, of political betrayal, and Yoshitsune finds himself trapped, completely outnumbered by his own brother's army. Defeat was certain. To die with honor, Yoshitsune decided to commit seppuku. He turned to his best friend, Benkei, and asked for one last favor. Just buy him some time. Benkei knew exactly what he had to do. He walked to the bridge, the only way into their castle, to hold the line, alone. And what happened next is the stuff of pure legend. Wave after wave of enemy soldiers charged that bridge, and Benkei just cut them all down. The stories say he single-handedly killed 300 men, literally creating a wall of bodies that nobody else dared to cross. The enemy commander, seeing his men were just terrified to get close, ordered his archers to fire. Arrow after arrow rained down on Benkei, but he didn't fall. He just stood there. After this long, tense silence, a few soldiers finally crept forward, only to find the impossible. Benkei was already dead, riddled with arrows, but held upright by his spear and his sheer force of will, still guarding that bridge so his master could die with honor. Okay, let's move on to our next story. This one's a tale of strategic genius from 16th century Korea, and it features one of the greatest naval commanders in all of history, Admiral Yi Sun-sin. The story of Yi Sun-sin is just this incredible paradox. On one hand, you have a military genius who never lost a single battle. He was undefeated. But on the other hand, his own success made people so jealous that his king had him stripped of his rank, thrown in prison, and tortured not once, but twice. And yet, his loyalty to his country never, ever faded. So after his jealous rival gets the entire Korean navy completely destroyed, the king, in a total panic, puts Yi back in charge. But he's given command of what's left, which is just 13 ships. And with this tiny fleet, he had to face a Japanese armada of 333 vessels. In what became the legendary Battle of Myeongnyang, Yi used his brilliant strategy and knowledge of the tides to sink 31 enemy ships without losing a single one of his own. It was a victory that should have been completely impossible. Years later, in the final battle to drive the Japanese out of Korea for good, Yi was leading the charge when a stray bullet hit him. He knew the wound was fatal. He also knew that if his men heard he was dead, their morale would shatter. So he issued this final, brilliant command to his son and nephew. They carried him below deck. His nephew put on his armor and kept beating the war drum, and they led the fleet to a massive victory.
Admiral E died listening to the sounds of his final triumph, all because his last act was a deception that saved his nation.
All right, our final story brings us way forward in time to a much more recent conflict, the brutal island-hopping campaigns of World War II. And this is where we meet Captain Ben Solomon, a man whose entire job was to save lives, not take them.
So, Ben Solomon was a graduate of the USC Dental School. In the Army, he was serving as a field surgeon. His role wasn't to fight, it was to heal. Under the rules of the Geneva Convention, his sole purpose on the battlefield was to save lives, period. But during the Battle of Saipan in 1944, thousands of Japanese soldiers launched this final desperate banzai charge. Solomon's medical tent, which was right behind the front lines, was quickly overrun and just flooded with over 30 wounded American soldiers.
As Japanese soldiers started storming the tent, actually bayoneting the wounded men inside, Solomon made a choice. He grabbed a rifle, killed the intruders, and then ordered his medics to get the wounded soldiers out of there. His duty instantly shifted from healer to protector. He told them he would stay behind, hold the enemy off for as long as he could, and then grabbed a machine gun from a fallen crew to make his stand.
When American forces finally retook the area a few days later, they found Solomon's body slumped over that machine gun. And laid out in front of him was a pile of 98 dead enemy soldiers. The dentist had single-handedly held off a massive enemy force, all to save his comrades.
And the scene itself told a story of just unimaginable ferocity. An autopsy showed that Solomon's body had been hit by 76 bullets, not to mention countless bayonet wounds. The evidence suggested that even after he was mortally wounded, he had somehow repositioned the heavy machine gun multiple times to keep on fighting. He was a healer, forced to become a warrior, in the ultimate act of protection.
So what's the thread that ties these three men together? I mean, you've got a monk from feudal Japan, an admiral from 16th century Korea, and a dentist from World War II. On the surface, they couldn't be more different. But at their core, they all shared something incredibly profound.
For Ben Kai, it all came down to absolute, unbreakable loyalty to one man, his lord and his friend. For Yi Sun-sin, it was a deep, patriotic duty to his country, even a country whose leaders had betrayed him time and again. And for Ben Solomon, it was this selfless commitment to his fellow soldiers, the men who were under his care.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Whether it's loyalty to a person, love for a country, or a duty to protect the people next to you, this capacity for ultimate sacrifice is just such a powerful, timeless, and truly awe-inspiring part of the human story. So what do you think? Which of those forces is the strongest of all?